So here's the thing. I can't teach you how to be a writer. I just can't. Writing is a skill that you have to practice on your own. And I can generally give you some nudges, some tips, some hints, and some tools. And that is my focus in this class. It's a focus on giving you as many tools as you can possibly hold, as many as I can give you, so that when you are doing your own writing, you have them in hand and can try different things out. These are not things that I do often anymore when I'm sitting down and actually writing. They're kind of in the back of my head. I use them a lot in outlining, and I use them a lot in diagnosing. Early in my career, these sorts of tools were really handy to just try a tool out to see how it worked for me. But for right now, the main thing I want you to take away is you will probably get almost nothing from this class unless you are currently working on your writing. Let's talk about what it takes to do a first draft on a 100,000-word novel. Now, some of you watching might have full-time jobs and families and things, which for you, if you can get 100,000 words a year, good job. If you are single and a student and maybe only working part-time, then this is a great time to build some of those habits because I did that for many years, and I know that there is some free time in there. You may feel really scatterbrained. You may feel like you're doing too much, and some of you may have like overachiever 18 credit hour stuff. I bet you were one of those. Just wait till you have kids. Average writing speed for a writer is between 200 and 500 words an hour. Okay, writing new prose in a story. Good rule of thumb to have. If you are outside those bounds, it's okay. Everyone is different, but that's a pretty wide range. And my experience has been that if you're well below that, that you can speed it up with good habits and good practice. Good habits and practice would be things like learning to turn off the Candy Crush and the email and the social media and learning to focus on your storytelling. And if you have a real trouble with that, you know, getting a notepad and going outside and writing longhand or things like that to shake the need to be checking your email every few minutes. If you're well below, if you're like at 50 words an hour, then you are spending too much time on email, or you are worrying about each word way too much, to an extreme amount, which does happen as well. One of the things you want to learn to do is you want to learn to write consistently. One of the problems that you run into if you're focusing on each word is you aren't good enough yet to focus on each word. You aren't going to be, to get better at writing, you're going to have to get to the point where you're writing big chunks of writing and then trying to teach yourself to do things as you're doing that. It's really good as a writer to kind of keep in the back of your mind, I am usually a little bit too passive in my voice. Let me practice not writing with as much of a passive voice. That's a good thing to do, but you need to have written enough to know that that's consistently a problem in yourself, and I would recommend that you do the revision after, because then you'll see what you're doing by habit. If you've got a whole book you can look at, and you can go through that book and be like, I'm going to cut all the passive voice from this book. That will teach you more about not using the passive voice than thinking about every sentence while you write it. If I'm using the passive voice. And in fact, after doing that whole book revision, the next book you write, you will have internalized already some of those things, and you will just stop doing it by custom, just by writing. So you need to turn off the internal editor, and you need to turn off Candy Crush. What do kids play these days? They don't play Candy Crush. That's like 50 years ago. Play Among Us. Oh, Among Us would be even worse because you're interacting with people, right? Like Candy Crush, you could like flip a few things and then go back. But Among Us, you do that, you're dead, right? You're like a little half person with a bone sticking out. Whatever it is, you need to learn to be able to turn it off and shoot for that 200 to 500 words an hour. The fast writers I know, hey, Rachel, what do you do in about an hour? 1,000 words an hour. The fast writers I know go to about 1,000 words an hour. And that is not a ridiculous speed. That's actually a lot of pros I know do between 750 and 1,000 rough draft words in an hour. If you're doing that, even if you're at, let's say you're at 250 words an hour, which is really kind of slow. You really should be able to get to 400 to 500 pretty easily. You're doing 250 words an hour. To do 100,000 words, then, you need to find 8 hours a week, right? If you're not willing to find 8 hours a week, then that's when you have to say, maybe being pro in the next 10 years is just not something I can do. Maybe I'm going to go pro in the next 20 years, right? But most people with 4 hours on a Saturday, where you go, I would recommend getting your loved ones involved in this and saying, I really want to try doing this writing thing. Sanderson says I should be shooting for 500 words an hour, then in 4 hours on a Saturday, I can do 2,000 words, and that is my writing for the week. Will you guys, protect my writing time? Guard the door. Make sure, during these 4 hours, will you take the child, the toddler, and entertain them so that I can have 4 hours? And if I have those 4 hours, then I don't have to stress for the rest of the week. If you can do that, then you can write a book every year. 100,000 words, 2,000 words a week gets you a rough draft every year. And you will find that you will pick up speed as you do this. My first book, it took me like 3 or 4 years, but 2 of those years were on a mission. And I was not getting a lot of writing done on my P days during the 1 hour I had, or 2 hours while my companions were playing basketball. Actually, it was ping pong because I was in Korea, but people find it odd that missionaries play ping pong. But if you're in Asia, on your mission, you will know ping pong is the thing. Regardless, you probably can find 4 hours a week to work on being a professional writer, and that's what I would recommend doing. Here's the caveat, though. I have a good friend, Jancy, who is a binge writer. I don't know if she still is. I'll have to ask her. I know she was a few years ago. And this is an uncommon, but not unheard of type of writer. I believe Scott Card was a binge writer at one point in his career. I don't know if he still is. Binge writers are people who prepare and prepare and prepare and think about their story. Even if they're not outlining, they're thinking about it for like 9, 10 months. And then they sit down in a month or 2 and they write the whole book, right? If you're a school teacher, binge writing is a very good way to do it, because my experience with school teachers has been, having married one and knowing several, that writing during the school year is just really hard, because school teaching is one of those jobs that consumes your entire life, and there are always more things to be doing for your students. And so taking the summer and saying, my summertime is my binge writing, I focus on my books, that might be the way you go, right? There's an exception to every rule of thumb in writing where somebody really successful has done the opposite thing and it has been the right thing for them. So keep that in mind. By the way, another way of talking about outline or discovery writers is people use the word pantser. So if you hear that word, it's on forums and things a lot. People say pantser for discovery writer. I prefer George Martin's terms, which are gardener and architect. Really great ways of looking at it. Both of them tend to take about the same amount of time, most of the time. Outliners spend extra time up front. Pantsers spend extra time on the back end. One of the things I've noticed about people who discovery write quite a bit is their endings tend to be terrible in their first drafts. If you've written stories and you've gotten to the end and you're like, I have no idea something, then that's an indication that you lean this direction, right? People who write this way tend to go off on tangents sometimes. When someone talks about their writing and says, I didn't know that I was going to, I had a friend once who's like, I didn't know there was a troll in my book until I got to the chapter and then there was a troll. So I wrote about the troll and then the book became about the troll. That is a discovery writer right there. Now over here on the outliner side, outliners tend to have trouble with wooden or stiff characters. This is because you've got this structured outline and your character sometimes doesn't have enough room to kind of breathe and go the direction they would, so you just kind of force them to do the plot points in your outline. And because of that, if you've gotten, feedback on your books, it's like, the characters feel a little wooden. The plot is great, it's a cool mystery, but I could never get into the characters. That might be an indication that you lean this direction. And you can mitigate both of those problems, right? And if you're an outline writer saying, I keep getting this whole wooden thing about my characters, maybe I need to do some free writes with these characters, just some discovery writing, just where I have them, first person viewpoint talk about their life, and then say, okay, how what I'm writing contradict what this character really feels like in the back, to me in the back of my head, who they are. How can I mitigate that issue? Knowing these things can really help you develop a style that kind of walks down the middle, because ideally, you're going to do it all well. You're going to have both great endings and great characters. That's part of what makes great books. You just are going to want to see what sort of habits you have as a writer that might make one or the other more difficult. So you can't do both of these things at once. They are mutually exclusive. You can try them out. What do? I generally do a lot of upfront work on my outline, and I do a lot of upfront work on my world building. I do less upfront work on my characters. Once I know the setting and I kind of know the general story that I'm trying, I will then basically cast people in roles and write a few scenes from their viewpoint and see if this personality that I'm developing for this character will work. Sometimes it works right off. Sometimes it takes 3 or 4 tries until I find the right voice for the character. So I discovery write my characters in a Stephen King way, and I outline write my story and my world more in an Orson Scott Card way. But because my characters are discovery written, what that means is I am constantly remaking my outline. I don't throw it out the window. A lot of writers do. That's their tool. They write an outline, they think they're like, all right, now I go, and then the outline goes out the window and they just go wherever they want to go, which is actually perfectly valid, right? It works for them. But for me, I'm always rebuilding that outline, getting it closer to the kind of melding between how the character arcs are working and how the story arc is supposed to work. And my second draft after I finish the book is usually to smooth that out, to get those two to work well together. And that process works really well for me. As a new writer, you have to be settling on what type of story you want to tell. You have to be deciding on, what things work for you, and you also have to be figuring out what you're wrong about. A lot of things such as being very info dumpy. A lot of newer writers are like, but no, this is my characterization. This is how I get my character across through these really long extended info dumps that are sometimes flashbacks about the character's whole life story. And in most cases, you're wrong. That is not your character. That is weak writing that you could learn to practice and be stronger at and get your character across. But when you do it well, when you know and you're confident in it, you end up with something like Name of the Wind that I mentioned earlier, which is a heroic account of a character's past told all in flashback. And it's the perfect example of using first person to convey character. How long is too long for introductions? Like most writing questions, the answer is it depends on a lot of factors. Novels are not like screenplays where it's very easy to pinpoint the number of pages you should spend doing a given thing, because a novel's length is going to vary wildly, and your structure is going to vary wildly depending on your own preferences and the genre you're writing in. So while you can get a screenplay format book that's going to be like, all right, on page 6, you should have done this. I can't tell you that for your novel. I can tell you this. You generally want to go a little faster into it than you are comfortable as a new writer. The sooner you can introduce the tone of your story and your character's main conflict, maybe not the main conflict of the plot, but how the character is going to relate to it, the better off you're going to be. What you want to really do is you want to sell us on being in this character's head. And that is if you can do nothing but sell us on the character's personality in the first couple of chapters, you can coast a long way on that in a novel. And unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, how famous you are. Every reader has a certain number of, like a threshold of crap they'll let an author get away with, right? And everyone's threshold is different, and the things they count as crap that they have to let the author get away with is different based on the individual. For instance, some readers might pick up a book like this, and that's immediately, all right, I'm skeptical, Sanderson, right? Like, I have read big books like this before that have meandered a ton and then haven't had a good payoff, and because that's my experience, that's crap that is going against your stuff I have to put up with. You already have basically a red mark against you. Other people pick up that book and be like, oh, I've had wonderful experiences with big books. It is way cheaper on my pocketbook to buy this with an Audible credit instead of this with an Audible credit. Same price. And readers all have different thresholds here, but generally, you want to have as few red marks as possible for the story you want to tell. The story you want to tell is more important than getting rid of all red marks. If you try to get rid of all potential red marks that anyone could have against your book will probably turn out to be bland and uninteresting, and nobody will love it. And so you're going to have to take risks. You're going to have to do some things that are going to turn off some readers, but that are going to become selling points to other readers. That's why we have genre sections in bookstores. Because certain people, that corner of Barnes & Noble is the danger zone of nerddom, and I will never walk over there. And others of us are like, all right, where's the sci-fi section? Here, right? That doesn't mean that we wouldn't enjoy other types of stories, but we have enjoyed enough stories in the past of this sort of thing that being sci-fi fantasy immediately gives us more of this, green mark, so to speak. It gives us more threshold. We're like more willing to buy in. This is a long way of saying, how long is your introduction? Make it as short as possible to achieve your goals for the type of story you're telling. Get as soon as possible us into the main character's head, the main character's conflict, and the proper tone of your story as soon as is possible for the type of story you want to tell. You will rarely ever get feedback that your book started off too explosively and too interestingly, and I was too interested in the character. Never going to get that feedback. You might get feedback that they're like, it didn't progress so quickly, I didn't have time to get to know the character, and I got whiplash or things like that. That can totally happen. The big advantage that you have as a writer is that you can set up the situation perfectly to reflect what you want to do. Well, you can set up the situation perfectly to get the punchline that you want delivered. In the case of a smart character, you can set up. This is how classic two-person comedy acts work, right? One sets it up, and the other delivers the joke. You also have as much time as you need to pull out the perfect reference, joke, or piece of wisdom. And you're able to fake most of this by just applying a lot of time and setting up the situation. Remember that wisdom is often very contextual, and characters can be wise or intelligent in very different ways. And part of writing for me is exploring these different types of wisdom and the different ways that different characters see the world. And that one isn't nearly so hard because when I'm really in the mindset of the character, I can see how they would see the world, and I can see how this is relevant to everything else. And I'm trying very hard to express what they want to say, what that character would want to say in a way that's gonna feel right. We can show direct character emotion and thoughts in a way that films just cannot. And even comic books, we can do more of it because we have more words. What we can do in a fight scene is that we can very easily connect character motivation with character actions and give a sense of progress through a scene. A great fight scene in a book often has markers of progress that are happening through the course of the fight, and has its own narrative flow, meaning beginning, middle, and end. Within that middle, escalation of stakes or escalation of danger in some way, or changing and reassessing of goals. Showing a character going into a fight wanting one thing, realizing halfway through they need another thing. Raising the stakes because they have now been fighting for a while and that other thing has been getting further and further from their grasp is something that works really well in a novel. What you want to avoid, and where I got taken to task by this YouTuber who was correct, is blow-by-blows tend to be boring in any situation. I said that blow-by-blows were fun in visual mediums and not in books, and the YouTuber is correct. They're boring everywhere, right? Instead, you want to show the character's progress, the character achieving things, the character leveling up or leveling down, right? Trying things and failing. It should be progressing the plot, the character in some way, plot or character, ideally both. And it should have its own mini sequence of, like I said, beginning, middle, and end with goals and changes in goals and things like that. One easy trick is to say there are this many bad guys and the fight ends when they're down, and show the character being pushed more and more to their limits as they are trying to deal with all of these different forces fighting against them, to bring it to a natural conclusion of do they win or lose at the end. Readers love progress. This is like one of the key ideals for telling great stories, is to know that as a reader, most of us want to be able to feel like there is motion going on through the narrative, not just from where the characters are going. And that motion should give us a sense of progress toward an ending in some way. A lot of what we do that makes things smooth or work, quote unquote, on screen is all about characters making sure that it doesn't look like the author is doing things, right? Like, this is why it's kind of dangerous in some ways to watch one of these streams and get the behind-the-scenes information, because it pulls that curtain back. You see how the sausage is made. And for a lot of us writers, we go through a period where it's harder to read books because now we see all the things that are being done rather than the story. For me, that lasted for a couple of years in college, and then I passed kind of beyond it to where now the way that an author is constructing a story is part of the joy. It's like I see a different layer, and I think I enjoy stories more than I used to. But regardless, what your goal is going to be here is to make things that are intentional not look intentional or deliberate. Meaning, when the reader is reading, you're like, oh, now's the part where they explain the backstory. You have kicked them out of the story. They are thinking about the meta context of that story. What is going on there is really maintain the illusion. And to do this with characters, I found that I have to change my mindset a little bit about characters. I have to be thinking about the character, as I often say, being the protagonist of their own story, regardless of who they are, in the story I'm writing, right? And asking myself, what was the character doing before the book started? The book there's not a beginning to the story for the character. It's just a natural evolution of their life. Maybe something interrupted their life, yes, but they don't know that they're starting a story generally when it starts. They should be living their life, and they should be interested in things that aren't directly related to the plot that you are going to be sending them on. And this just kind of plays into this idea of letting everyone be the protagonist in their own story. They don't have to be, the hero, but they are the protagonist. They're the person taking action. And so believable backstory for me is wrapped up in this. It's wrapped up in understanding that a character is not just one role in a story. Not writing them to a role, but writing them to a personality, which means that they will wear different hats in different situations, like all of us do. They will act differently in different situations, and making clear their motivations that will let the reader understand that, so that the character doesn't feel schizophrenic, unless indeed they are schizophrenic. Making sure that you know what this character would be doing. And I generally don't fill out a big dossier. I know some writers like dossiers, where it's like this, you can find these online. It's like, what is your character's favorite food? What is your character's favorite movie? All of these sorts of things. And I don't generally do that. What I'm looking for is the kind of general rubric of the character's life. If I know the fundamentals, then I'll be able to answer the simple questions. If I'm asked, what would this character's favorite movie would be? If I know the fundamentals of who that character is, I feel like I could answer that. So I am looking for driving principles, driving motivations in their lives, things that change the way they see the world. How is the way they see the world different from me? And all of this is part of the backstory. And you generally will have times where you kind of info dump on that because you can't avoid it entirely. But the more you can avoid it, the better. So that if we can pick up from context that this is an experienced character who has spent a lot of time studying, from the way that they talk to someone that they meet on the street, rather than saying, she was a student at such and such university until blah, blah, blah happened, and then she became a student at this university. Like, if picking those things up in context is a lot of what makes books fun to read. As a reader, being able to read and just get a sense for who the character is and what they've lived. And your job as a writer is to figure out how to do that in a way that makes it fun, makes it interesting, makes each character a little bit of a puzzle to figure out that the reader's subconscious is working on, even while they are just reading about something else. They're picking up that this character's diction is just a little bit different. They choose different types of words and these sorts of things. That is what makes books fun. So I think of these three things as the three pillars of storytelling. We've got plot, setting, character. By the way, that's how I spell. You'll figure it out. You're smart people. Plot, setting, character. And there's really this all-important thing in the middle of it, conflict. And conflict is what glues these things together. A story is not a study of your setting. A story is not an encyclopedia entry of your setting, but neither is it just a recitation of events, nor is it simply a character sketch talking about all the aspects of a character's life. And one of the best ways that you can make sure that you're gluing these things together is by asking yourself about the conflict. Find the conflict. A lot of times your conflict will be people being in conflict between two of these areas. What the character wants to do with their life versus what the demands of their life are. For instance, you may want to stay home, smoke your pipe, tell stories, and sweep your hobbit hole. But you may end up with a bunch of dwarves and a wizard on your doorstep saying, you need to come help us. That is plot and character conflict. That is what makes a story. A story isn't a hobbit sat in the hole. A story is a hobbit who wanted to sit in the hole is forced out of it by a bunch of dwarves and a wizard. Another question that is really handy to ask yourself is, what does the character want and what do they need? And what is preventing them from realizing the difference between those two things? And again, oftentimes with that one, the character's own growth is preventing them from realizing what they actually need. In While You Were Sleeping, Sandra Bullock thinks she wants a certain guy to be her boyfriend. What does she need? The one that's actually falling in love with her. What's preventing her from realizing that? Certain hang-ups in her character and certain lies that she has told. So it is both a character thing and a plot thing that the lies she has told are interrupting her ability to have the things she needs and to recognize what she needs. The story then is about her working on the character flaws, overcoming the plot problems, and coming to recognize that what she wants is not what she needs, and reassigning what her desires are to the things she needs. So, when I am building my plot in my outline for a book, I am looking for a couple of things. One of the main things I'm looking for are my promises, my progress, and my payoff. And the most important thing generally for me to determine is the progress part. Because once I understand the progress part in my outline, I can figure out the correct promises and how to make good on that. And when I'm doing that, I am usually looking for some sort of plot archetype that I can use. By my definitions today, a plot archetype is different from a plot structure. Plot structure, which we'll talk about a little bit later, is something like 3-act format or the hero's journey. A plot archetype is a style of plot, what we're trying to achieve. To explain this, I'll use Mistborn. When I was building Mistborn, there were a couple things that made me excited to write the book. The first was that it was going to be a heist. This was one of my primary plot archetypes. Heist is a type of story. It is a story that you can go find other heist-type stories and learn what they did. You can research them, you can figure them out, and you can start using them. I also knew, in my outlining, that there was going to be a master-apprentice plot. Right? That there was going to be this story about Vin learning to become a Mistborn. This is the My Fair Lady side of it, right? Vin trains under Kelsier to learn to move among the nobility and also to learn how to use allomancy, right? And then I also knew there was going to be what I'll call an information plot. Info. This is a plot, it's a mystery, right? There are certain things we don't know about the history of the Lord Ruler that are going to be teased as clues. So I look at these three things and I say, how do I build a story around these ideas? Oh, there's also one more. There is the relationship. Right? There's a relationship, a Vin and Ellen romance subplot. I think I got all the main ones looking at that. Someone asked when I was scanning the questions, which we'll start digging into next week, when they said, do you use only one sort of progress and one sort of payoff for a book, or do you use more? Which is an excellent question. There's your answer. Mistborn has 4 major ones that I was juggling. This is appropriate for an epic fantasy novel, right? The thing is, one does kind of have to be more important than the others. And as I worked on this, this book, I really kind of moved the heist to kind of almost being secondary. And it was the master-apprentice plot that became the actual main. Like if you're reading the book, most of the sense of progress you're getting is Vin becoming Mistborn. And that is the core. Most of the time you're spending with her is her going to the balls, fighting the people, learning the magics, all of these things. And so it's actually really a master-apprentice story that has a B-plot or a sub-mode that is a heist that also has these kind of minor other secondary plots. I want to talk to you about what I did to build the heist. What I find very useful is to see what other people have done. Instead of just following a recipe, I want you to start looking at recipes and things people have created and try to pull out what works. What I did is I went to a bunch of my favorite heist stories. I'm going to use, I watched a bunch of heists, I read a bunch of heists, and I settled on there kind of being 2 main archetypes for a heist. I looked at them and I'm like, what makes them interesting? Why do they work? Well, the Ocean's 11 type plot goes like this. You gather a team. You usually have one newbie to explain things to. You then have a explain the plot, explain the problem. In Ocean's 11, the remake, they have this thing where, like, it's Brad Pitt that's there, right? And they're saying, we have to do this. And he's like, which we can't ever do. It might be George Clooney saying it. But it's basically, they present the problem with a cool sort of cinematic methodology to them. It's like, here is the bank or the casino we're going to rob. They have this thing that we'll have to beat, which we can't beat because it's impossible. And they have this thing we have to beat, which we can't beat because it's impossible. And we have this thing. And they lay out basically, here's the big problem of what we're going to do. And then they start talking about breaking it to little pieces. And you follow the newbie, usually, along, going to get all the little parts that are going to come together for your big solution. But one of the key attributes of this heist was, at the end, there's a piece missing. That the newbie often is like, but what about this? And they're like, oh, we'll figure that out. You don't have to worry about that. There's a big piece missing, and you get to follow along these little pieces as you see how they're going to solve each of the problems that they had, and they explain the problem plot, but you've still got this lingering, what's going to happen with the piece that's missing? Everything's going to go wrong. It creates this sense of doom and dread and inevitability until you get to the end. And then the twist is they all knew how they were going to solve that problem anyway. They just didn't tell the newbie so they could surprise us, right? And so at the ending, you think everything went wrong, but then they take off their masks, and lo and behold, they were the SWAT team all along, or something like that. And boom, we actually all went according to plan. You just didn't know it. This is different from the Italian Job plot, which has kind of some similar attributes. They gather a team, explain problem. But this style of heist did something really interesting that I found. They introduced problem number A, problem number B, or letter, problems A, B, C, and D, right? And they said, we're going to solve them with solutions 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you follow the plot kind of the same way, except at the end, they get to the ending and they find out that instead of problems A, B, C, and D, they have problems E, F, G, and H. You've probably seen heists like this. They do all their planning. They do all their preparation. They're ready to go, and then they move the target. It goes to another country or something like that. And suddenly, all this preparation is out the window. We talked about this a little bit last week in the pull the rug out from underneath no, it wasn't to you guys. It was someone else. Never mind. I told someone, they asked me, what do I do if I want to pull the rug out from underneath people? This is a great way to do that, because the way that they solve this, do you guys know? Have you guys seen this movie? What do? They don't exactly. They take solution 1 and they say, wow, if we jury rig this thing, we can solve problem F with that. And number 4, the person we recruited specifically to crack the safe can actually break into this car that we can use. And suddenly we'll use 2 for E and 3 for H. And what happens is you get a jumbling up of all the preparations solving the problems in different and unexpected ways. Why this works so well is, oftentimes, if you want to have a cool twist in your story and you pull the rug out from underneath people, it's a little bit like I said last week, promising someone a car and giving them something else completely different that they're not expecting. In addition, in your storytelling, your reader will invest time in the middle in your progress. They'll spend most of the time in the book focusing on the things the characters are doing to progress the story. And so, if you built a heist where you made 1, 2, 3, and 4 completely irrelevant now, that is 80% of the reader's experience in the story getting thrown out the window, and they will feel annoyed at you. All right? They will be frustrated because you promised them something. You were also probably promising them a twist if you're doing a heist, because heists are kind of about twists, but you have also upended them. How do you solve this? You make sure that the time they spent on 1, 2, 3, and 4 is still very relevant by applying it on the fly to solve new problems, which suddenly becomes very satisfying because you both get a twist, plus you feel like your expertise, the amount of time you as a reader spent experiencing the story, came together at the ending. When you're doing this, when you're breaking down a plot, one of the things I would recommend you do is ask yourself these questions. Why do people love this? Why do I love this? Why do I really like taking one of these plots and watching them or playing with them? What are the elements I have to make sure I don't get rid of, right? Hypercompetence. You could make a heist without hypercompetence. It would be a different type of story. But if what you love about them is that hypercompetence, lean into that and make sure you're making use of that in order to tell your story. One of the cool things about starting to look at plots like this is also you can strip a plot down to its archetype, and you can apply then genre trappings to it. It's really interesting. I've done all this, and then I had a chance to talk with Joe Russo, who was one of the filmmakers, one of the directors who made Infinity War. And I asked him, I said, Joe, what did you like? How did you build the plot of Infinity War? And he said, oh, it's really cool. Not a lot of people understand how to do this, but we just took a heist. For them, it was a bash and grab, which is actually a third archetype I didn't even put up on here. And we said, we're going to do a superhero movie that's a heist. and we're going to plot it like this and apply it to superhero science fiction, and people will love it because they love a heist, but they also won't look at it and see a heist because they'll see a superhero story. And indeed, it is, I don't think, that uncommon for storytellers to say, let's take what works really well in this genre and let's apply other trappings to it so that I have a familiar framework. Particularly newer writers don't know how to workshop. And one of the things they'll try to do is they'll try to make your story into the story they would write instead of a better version of the story you want to write. And that is the single worst thing that can happen in feedback, is someone who is not appreciating the story you want to make and they want to turn it into something else. And new workshoppers are really bad at doing this. In other words, they're really good at doing a bad thing. And the only way they know is to tell you how they would do it, which can be completely wrong for your story. This is extra dangerous if you are by nature more of a discovery writer. If you don't think about your story ahead of time, if you're not working from an outline, someone can come to you and say, man, it'd be so much better if you did this. And you're like, my story needs to have that. It was a romance, but now it needs a mystery, right? And then someone else is like, well, I don't really like stories with female protagonists. And like, well, I'll change the gender so that everyone, like, you can just go completely spiral out of control with people giving you feedback and you taking it too sincerely. Good side of writing groups is they can be a really great support structure. Before you get published, having a goal and a deadline for submitting is really helpful. And it's okay to have a deadline in order to submit. You don't have to be, like, we all have different psychology. Some of us need a deadline. And so you can create one for yourself, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Of people who are likely to give you good feedback, a writing group that has been working with you for a while are the types of people who will learn, hopefully, your writing style, learn to like what you're doing, and they will be much better at giving you advice on making the story the way you want to make it after they get to know you and things like this. So you can cultivate a group who eventually will give you good feedback, even if their feedback at the start is not that great. Watch out for editors who are leading you towards scams. Happens more rarely now than it used to happen, but there were some editors who basically would pretend to be editors, pretend they could publish your book, but really what they did was they picked up your book, recommended you towards a vanity press or toward editors from whom they got a kickback for if you worked with them. It's not bad to pay an editor. Freelance editing is totally a thing, worthwhile to do, but they should be upfront that they're a freelance editor. And I always am skeptical of someone that you sent a submission to for traditional publishing who then refers you to independent editor and things like that. So those are things to watch out for. The skill of a writer is what readers and editors are looking for. I don't know if I said this last week, but oftentimes writers will come and be like, oh man, they reject, editors reject people so quickly. But they really can reject very quickly. If I were to bring up here, roll out this piano, and have two people play on the piano. One picked up the piano last year. They're not a complete noob, but they've been working at it assiduously these last 8 months or whatever, and have gotten decent. And then we brought someone in who is 20 years practiced concert pianist and really knows their stuff. How soon do you think you could tell? Right away. An editor or a reader can generally tell after a few pages that same thing. Now, readers tend to be a little more forgiving than editors in that readers can like the ideas and themes, even if the writing isn't necessary. They will notice, but they're like, what, doesn't bug me. And that's just fine. But people can tell by instinct which things are working better than others, even if they themselves are not experts in that field. And so you can, unfortunately, get judged very quickly based on your writing. That means that your ideas, however cool they may be, most of the time, people aren't going to get to your cool ideas if you can't write a great scene starting off. And that's what we're really looking for. We are looking for the skill of someone who has practiced their craft and has really learned to be able to grab an audience quickly and convince them that the story is worth reading. How do you keep drive to get published in the wake of failure? For me, the key element is to not be writing because you want a career. It is to be writing because you love writing and you would be doing this anyway. And then your success is not tied to whether you become one of the 15. Your success is tied to whether you are satisfied with your writing. And if you, either through luck or providence, manage to get into the spot where you can make a living at your writing, great. And I know that's what you want to try to do. And indeed, it's not like I didn't work toward that during those years. I wrote more than I probably would have if I hadn't been shooting for that. But at the end of the day, what kept me going was knowing that I would be writing stories anyway. I would be writing books. And if I'm not one of the lucky ones who can make a living from that, it's still the thing that I love. It's still a hobby. It's still, I'm part of the community. And I decided that, if I died at age, let's say 110, and I had written 100 unpublished novels, that I had to be okay with that. And that was still a bigger success in life than if I had just stopped writing and doing the thing I love. That's why I talk about this idea of, we're going to pretend that everyone wants to be a professional writer. And I want you to pretend that for this class. But you should have in the back of your mind the understanding that, if you were going to become an attorney, and you went to law school and they said, of the people in this class who graduate with honors, work for 10 years, and are among the best, only 10% of those will actually make a living at this job, you might then reconsider law school, right? If you were in an engineering class and they said, sorry, there's only about 10% of you are going to make it. That's counting the ones who actually do all the work and are good at it. Only 10% of you will make it. Because 10% of the people who get into the small class, everyone who gets into my small class is good enough to go pro in just a skill-wise, right? And why don't they go pro? Whims of the market, right? Like, this is entertainment. You could be making, if you're a musician and you are doing the best Mongolian throat singing that can be done, and there's room for one band, The Who do that, and you just, I had a friend in college who was a pianist, and he was really good. He was somewhere in the top 10 pianists in the state during his years, but there were jobs for 3 of them, right? And he went and became a computer programmer, right? If you know that going in, that those chances are what they are, and you're okay with saying, you know what, I still love this. I'm still going to give it a try. Maybe I'll be one of the 10. Maybe it'll just be something that I love my entire life, and I don't become one of the 10, or one of the 1 out of the 10%. But do understand that there are others among that group who have success who are not full-time writers. There are people who release a novel and then have another job, or release a couple of novels. There are people who self-publish a sequence of novels and find a small fan base of several hundred people who really like their books. It's a niche audience. They're writing something that only a small niche likes, but those people love it. They have an audience. You still have to support yourself some other way because that's not enough to make a living on, but that's still success depending on how you consider it. Sometimes people don't make it just because they don't end up having the opportunities, right? They don't, unfortunately, networking is a thing in basically all careers. And that's tough to tell a group of probably introverts who do not want to go network. I will tell you, if you want to see something very uncomfortable, go back to 20 years ago when Dave said, Brandon, you need to go network. Go to the conventions and hang out in the bars. And I'm like, I have never been in a bar. He's like, well, guess what? He meant the hotel bars, which are a little different thing. But so there I was 20 years ago with a Sprite sitting at a hotel bar at a science fiction convention. I had no idea what I was doing. Networking is hard. And sometimes really great writers do not make it because they just don't have the networking opportunities. It's not like this is an old boys club. That's not how publishing is anymore. Maybe used to be, but it really isn't. They all are just looking, all the editors are looking for people to publish, but it just might not be. It might be that you have special holdbacks that make it hard for you. If you're dyslexic, it's harder to write books. Dave Pilkey's dyslexic, and he is one of the best-selling writers right now. He does the Dogman books and the Captain Underpants books. But that might hold you back. Your grammar, because of dyslexia, just might hold back your writing for a while, and you might have to figure out how to get around that. There are lots of reasons why someone who's very good at writing could end up not being successful as a full-time writer, and you have to be okay with understanding that that might be you. And my mother is an accountant. She always told me, have a good backup plan. I would counsel you to listen to her, because having a good backup plan is a great idea if you're going to try to be a writer. You can do it. It's totally within your grasp, but not all of you can do it. And that's the sad truth about going into entertainment, right? There are very few slots for people to make a full-time living compared to most jobs. That's just how it is. So I would say love the writing and then try your best to make a career out of it. But if you can't understand, that doesn't make you a failure. That just makes you, the whims of fate have not gone your direction. Maybe they will someday. A lot of people get published in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And you may want to find something else to do in the meantime that you are also passionate about. This is going to be a little bit of a downer for a bit, but I promise it won't end on a downer. Plus, you have a lovely macaw to look at if you get bored of me. This is a very common lie. In fact, it's one that we writers tell you a lot. Media in general likes to tell this lie, particularly to teens. A lot of well-meaning adults tell it to you, teachers included. And the lie is that you can do anything you want to. We are selling you generally in books an ideal. And that ideal is that you can do whatever you want, no matter what it is, if you just put your mind to it. And it's a lie. It really is a lie. Now, it has some good parts to it. It's meant to inspire you. It's meant to give you hope. It's meant to, help you to overcome and things like this. And I don't necessarily think that's bad. I like that it does all of these things, and my goal isn't to make you feel terrible. I'm an optimist. I like writing books about people who succeed despite terrible odds. Like, that is my whole thing, right? People who find they have hidden talents, who are very determined, who go forward and try to accomplish something great. But I also feel like I need to be upfront and straight with you. You can't do anything. Sometimes determination and grit is not enough. Some things are simply impossible. And even for the things that are possible, luck plays a bigger role in accomplishments than any of us want to pretend. You might be saying to me, okay, Brandon, we know that when authors say you can do anything, what they really mean is, yes, we understand you can do anything as long as it doesn't violate the laws of physics and reality. We get that. We understand that. But becoming a famous novelist, you obviously did it, Brandon. You have done it. You want another one? You have to be told to do it. Okay. He really likes almonds. So he tries to use the force all the time to get almonds now. And yeah, it did work out for me. And I don't want to tell you, don't do what I did, right? Like, that's not at all what this is about. This is about me trying to be realistic about what you can do to achieve your dreams. And I worry that sometimes media, even the media I create, goes too far. That we profit off of selling you a dream without giving you the warnings, without giving you the realism, without actually talking about the stakes and the probability. I feel like sometimes we are selling this to your detriment. And so let's start off. I'm going to have 3 things with you three pieces of advice for you that I think will really, really help you moving forward to achieve your dreams, whatever they are. But first off, you need to understand something called survivorship bias, right? Survivorship bias is this really interesting thing. It is the way our psychology works. Human beings really want to trust the word of someone who's been successful. Makes sense, right? Successful person knows what they're doing, has been there before you, should have good advice. This can become a fallacy, though. Let's say that we did not know that flipping coins was random, the results of a coin flip. Just pretend there was something we didn't know was random, but it really was. And we had a big coin tossing contest where we got 1,000 people together to flip coins. And we were going to see who could flip heads the most times. And at the end of this, we crowned a victor, right? This person who had flipped the heads the most times. Not knowing that was a completely random event, we might send that person on book tour after they write a book on how to flip coins correctly. We might have them on talk shows. We might have them give inspirational speeches to teenagers saying, follow your dreams. You can be the best coin flipper too. Just follow my patented method. I flip coins and got heads all the time because I ate only broccoli for 10 years of my life. And if you do that, you indeed too can win the coin flipping contest. This is survivorship bias. We don't know how much of what put me right here, right now, was skill, how much was talent, and how much was luck. We can't divide that out. Certainly, all three play a part, and you can control some of those things and not others. This is dour, right? This is dour. It's kind of negative. I warned you the first half would be a little bit negative. But that's not my intention, as I warned you. My intention is to get you to be aspirational and to really believe that you can. I want you to have success. I want you to do it not though with the I can do anything. That's where you start. I want you not even to say it'll be really hard, but stick in there. That's true too, but I want to take the step beyond what we normally tell you, which are those two things. And I want to try and give you some tools. So let's revise that phrase, the you can do anything. Let's revise it to say what I want you to think instead, which is, I can do hard things. Doing hard things has intrinsic value, and they will make me a better person, even if I end up failing. What does that mean? Well, tip number one, all right? Tip number one is in making goals. The people who are in my class are really serious about their writing. They have often finished multiple novels. They are really good at what they do. And of those 15, every year, I have one or two who end up going pro and making a living, at least part-time, as a novelist. So that's maybe better odds than people have told you in the past that becoming a novelist is 1 in a million. But these 15 all have the skill and the talent to become professionals. They are all really good writers. And of them, 10% of them make it in the writing field. That's because writing involves a lot of luck. Let's think about this, right? Let's think about an Olympic runner, one of the fastest people in the world. In fact, someone who takes 4th place in an Olympic event, they're probably faster than 99.99% of people who have ever lived, probably with many more nines after that. They are one of the fastest people ever. But if their goal was win an Olympic medal, and they took 4th place, they did not win an Olympic medal, are they a failure because they didn't win an Olympic medal? Well, I guess it depends on how they set their goals, how they think about their goals, how they think about the thing that they're doing. They can't control who they're going to compete against, right? In fact, many people will take 4th in an Olympic event in a year when, if they had competed 4 years before, they might have gotten the gold, just because you can't determine who you're going to be competing against. I kind of had a crisis of faith about my profession in the year 2002, right? This is where I had been trying to write. I'd won this award, right? I had won the Andromeda 1 student writing competition. And I went to college thinking, I'm going to become a famous novelist. This is my goal. And I spent the next 10 years of my life writing novels. In fact, I wrote 13 novels. This story takes place when I was writing book number 12. None of these had sold. I finished book number 12, and I was submitting these books around to publishers, and I kept getting rejected. The books I'd written that I really loved, books 6, 7, and 8, got rejected by the publisher saying, these are too long, plus they're not dark enough. Everyone wants dark fantasy right now. Can you write something really dark? And so books 11 and 12 in particular, I tried to write like George R.R. Martin. I'm like, well, he's selling. I'll write books like them. And they were terrible, these books of mine. They were awful books. I'm not meant to write books like George R.R. Martin writes books. Or at least I'm not meant to try to chase the market in that sort of way. And so these books were really awful. They were dreadful. And I had this crisis where I'm like, I have written 12 novels, right? You might have trouble paying attention to me with a bird on my shoulder. I apologize. But written 12 novels. And they're pretty good novels, I think, but nobody wants to buy them, right? What am I doing with my life, right? Writing all these novels, having them fail, getting rejected. I try to write what I want. People tell me it's not good enough. I try to write what they want, and they still get rejected. Plus, they're just terrible books. Like, what am I doing? This was one of the most important points in my career because I decided, after a lot of soul searching, I asked myself, why am I writing these books, right? What is the point? Why am I doing this? Is it because I want to be a famous novelist? Yes, it is because I want to be a famous novelist. Should it be that? I think that's a worthy thing to have as an aspiration, but it shouldn't be the main reason I'm writing. I looked at what I'd done and I realized I sincerely loved writing these books. When I sat down to write, everything else faded, still does. And I enter a place of just pure creativity that I love. And I realized at that moment, if I never sold a book and I died, let's be optimistic, at age 105, and I had written 100 unpublished novels, I was a bigger success in that case than if I'd given up because I loved it, sincerely loved writing. And at that moment, my goal changed. My goal changed from being a famous novelist, from becoming a famous novelist, though I still wouldn't say no to that if it came along. My goal became, I'm going to get better with every book. I'm going to write the books that I love, and I'm going to do it my way. And I'm going to acknowledge that simply doing this is good for me, even if it's hard, because writing books is hard. Now, my story has a really happy ending. I sold a novel right soon after that. I wrote book number 13. That one didn't sell. It was actually book number 6 that I'd had a lot of faith in before. It'd gone through a bunch of rejection letters. I'd given up on it. And it ended up on an editor's desk and sat there for 18 months. I thought nothing was going to happen. And that editor eventually read the book and bought it. That was Elantris, my first epic fantasy. At least first one that sold. So fairy tale ending, right? But I think you need to focus on making goals that you have control over. I did not have control over whether I became a famous novelist. I didn't even have much control over whether I got published or not. I have a phrase in the Stormlight Archive. This is the book, The Way of Kings is the book I wrote as book number 13 after I decided that I was no longer going to, chase the market and I was not going to worry as much about publishing. And a central theme of the book, The Way of Kings, is a phrase, journey before destination. I embedded this into the lore of this world because I realized I can control my journey even if I can't always control my destination. The journey is what makes the destination worthwhile, in my opinion. And so I could say, I'm going to get better with every novel. I could say, I am going to keep writing books, even if I fail at it time and time again. That I can do. But I couldn't, for instance, say, I want to win awards because I don't have control over that. I want to write books that are worthy of awards. That I could do, and I think that I have. Early in my career, there's an award in the science fiction community. It's basically the Rookie of the Year award, right? And I really wanted to win this award. And I didn't, actually. John Scalzi won it. Scalzi! Scalzi became my nemesis, by the way, during that time. Our names are right next to each other on the shelf. We published it around the same time. Everywhere I went, it felt like John Scalzi had gotten there before. Like, I'd go sign books in a bookstore, and there's a bunch of signed John Scalzi books. And, it just happened enough times that when we both got nominated for the award, the Rookie of the Year award, I'm like, I'm going to lose to Scalzi, aren't I? And I did. And the thing about that award is you're only eligible 2 years. I lost it the next year to Naomi Novik, who is a fantastic writer. John is actually an amazing writer as well. And I then was not eligible anymore. I can never win that award. It's impossible. I lost it twice, and I'm done. This is why setting your sights on the right things can be so much more valuable than things you don't have control over. Instead of saying, I want to have a pet dragon, I asked myself, what do I want a pet dragon? I want a cool, intelligent pet that can hang out with me, that can talk to me, that can do all these things. And I realized I already had one. At that age, I had a lovebird, my bird Hop. And ever since then, I've had parrots because I love parrots. That is a goal I could achieve. And I'm really happy that I have it. Tip number 2. Let's move on from that one to tip number 2. Where did tip number 2, right? After your goals, tip number 2 is learn how you work. Being human is all about figuring out how to have done the things you want to have done, right? Most everybody does not want to do hard things because they're tough. I love writing, but starting writing in the morning still many times can be really hard, right? And writing is tough. It just is. And I'd rather be playing the Nintendo Switch. Let's be honest. Anyone who says otherwise, well, maybe they're just of a different sort of mindset than the rest of us. But for most of us, we just have to figure out what motivates us. And this is different for you. You should not feel bad that you have to kind of hack your brain to make yourself do the things that you want to have done. And figuring out what makes you do your work, the things you want to do, is really, really useful in life. Some of us respond very well to sticks, right? If I don't do this, I'm going to be in trouble. Some of us respond really well to carrots. Carrots are, if I do this, I get this nice reward. Some of us respond really well to a deadline, like having a writing group where your writing group is going to read your stories, and if you don't submit on time, you're going to feel guilty about it. A lot of us, that works really well for motivating us. For me, the thing that motivates me most is keeping track of my daily word count. If I make a spreadsheet and I write my daily word count every day, and I get to see that count up toward a goal word count, making a good goal, right? Then I'm intrinsically more likely to do my writing the next day if I've been able to get that sort of ding, that sort of feel that you get from playing a video game where you see your character level up. I've gamified writing for myself. That's how I make myself do my writing. Find out what works for you. Don't feel bad if you want to play video games instead sometimes. Maybe you want to read books instead of write them. You eating my button. Don't eat off my button. Everybody is like that. And you just have to figure out what makes you do what you want to do. It's almost like you have to trick yourself. But more, you just kind of figure out what it is that makes you do what you want to do. This is where experimentation is important. Learning what it takes to be successful in the way you want to be successful requires you to try a bunch of different things. Try a writing group. Try not having a writing group. Some people, writing group is terrible for their motivation for whatever reason. Number 3, the last of my tips on doing hard things is to break it down. I love big books, and I cannot lie. Break it down. I write a book 460,000 words long, word by word by word. Setting goals and achieving them is often more about breaking that goal into small, manageable pieces than it is about simply sitting down and doing something big, something great, something hard. Wonderful, but you got to be on that journey. You've got to figure out what about that journey you're going to enjoy and how you can have little successes along the way toward what you want to do. The way you become a great novelist is you practice a ton. And while my roommate had these huge, massive batches of homework he had to do, I was not given much homework. I had to do it myself. And that's kind of the problem with creative professions, is that we aren't given a good roadmap. We're just told, do it. And just do it is good. But my roadmap was I needed to write 13 novels before I sold one. It's a hard, long road for something that might not have ended up making me any money. And if you're going to do this, you need to be aware of it. You need to be aware that you can't control everything. I often talk about writing in the same way I talk about some of my friends who like to play basketball. Now, we are middle-aged guys. My friends who play basketball are never going to the NBA. But it's interesting. If you tell people I'm writing a book, one of the first things they will say to you is, oh, great, when are you going to sell it? How much money is it worth? And this, I think, gets into us writers, this sort of false sense that if we aren't making money off of what we do, then it has no intrinsic value. And I think it is actually the opposite. Writing has great intrinsic value, just like going and playing basketball. It's good for you to get better at writing books. It's going to make you better at expressing yourself. It's going to get those dreams out of your head and onto the page so you can share them with people. It's a little bit like telepathy, writing a story, getting to share what was in your brain with someone else and then getting to talk to them about it and see how they felt and how they saw the characters. There's nothing else like it. It's amazing. It's wonderful. It's incredible. And it is worth doing even if you never sell a book. That is my speech to you today. So I want to end today talking to you about the concept of hope, just briefly. Hope is a wonderful thing. Hope is what keeps us going when things look dark. Hope is what kept me writing books all of those years. But I want you to learn to temper your hope. I want you to learn to combine it with these things. I want you to take that hope and I want you to put it in goals that you know you have power over. I want you to take that hope and I want you to let it guide you through the difficult times of figuring out how your psychology works, because it isn't easy to figure out how your own psychology works, and you're going to fail a lot. You're going to end up playing, the Switch instead of writing your book a few times now and then. You're going to end up with all these things where you're like, maybe I'm not meant to be a writer. Maybe you're going to have a moment like me where you're like, what on earth am I doing? My mother was right. I'm going to be begging for beans by the side of the road. I'm never going to sell any books. That hope got me through it. The hope is important. But at the end of the day, I really want you to take that hope and I want it to drive you to look at your goals and say, all right, what is my actual path to victory? What can I do to accomplish these things? And everyone tells me my potential is limitless. All right, what am I going to do today to achieve those goals? And if you do those things, you will have success, even if the things you can't control prevent you from winning the gold medal because you're the fourth best at something that is really hard to do and that you should feel really proud of yourself for. Keep going. You can do hard things, and it is difficult but worth doing. And I have been Brandon Sanderson. This has been Magellan, who has been mostly a good bird. Yeah, mostly a good bird, except he really wants my buttons.